Hi everybody, Rad Mom here. Welcome back to the garden. I hope you can hear me because we're out here in the middle of the day and there's a lot of noise going on. But we're here to address a really just perfectly emblematic mainstream example of the trans nonsense at work. So hit like if you enjoy my content and subscribe to the channel for more of it. And let's go see what Trevor Noah has cooking for us today.
Veronica.
All right, Veronica Ivy, aka Rachel McKinnon, aka the dude that thinks he needs to be in women's cycling. All the same person. Fun, fun, fun.
Thank you. So, I'm going to say from the top, because I've noticed this happens in every conversation. Every time you bring up trans rights, or if you have a discussion and you say trans, people tense up. I understand why.
Me too. It's because if you say one wrong thing ever, it could be right now, but it could be wrong later. They will hunt you down like a dog and socially eviscerate you. That's why.
We live in a world where now there are people who are so transphobic that it makes it almost impossible for people who aren't to ask any questions.
Because asking questions is transphobic, right? That's the problem. Asking questions is transphobic. Why are you asking those questions? Why can't you just leave trans people alone? They just want to pee.
To have any conversations, to have any discourse that doesn't lump them in with transphobia. And so I'm
Right, because the vitriol is all coming from the turf side, right? All the death threats and all the threats of violence and all the doxing is coming from the turf side, right? Whatever. Whatever. The reason that there's no discourse is because this McKinnon persons, especially in the UK for a while now, apparently their motto has been no debate. That's not us. That's not the people asking the questions who don't want to debate. Come on, Trevor. Come on.
I'm really glad that you're joining us on the show to talk about this because it feels like one of the biggest issues in America, and yet no one.
It feels like one of the biggest issues in America. It sure does, doesn't it? Isn't that weird when we have like all these actual issues bubbling up from way deep below the surface that we had maybe thought had been taken care of, like white supremacy and economic just disaster, uh, disease. Like, really, really. It's a classic sort of just melting pot of woe. And yet, for some reason, we all find ourselves talking about trans people. That is kind of weird, isn't it?
Can seem to talk about it. So let's start with.
And yet, no one can seem to talk about it. He's hit the nail on the head there. One of the biggest. It seems like one of the biggest issues, but no one can talk about it.
Issues in America. I'm really glad that you're joining us on the show to talk about this because it feels like one of the biggest issues in America, and yet no one can seem to talk about it. So
Yeah, that right there should tell you everything that you need to know about who these people really are. This is an authoritarian movement, y'all. It is. That's the very definition of authoritarianism, something that is just so incredibly important, but you cannot talk, you can't discuss it. Controlled speech. Hello.
let's start with your journey. You competed at some of the highest levels in sports, and as your hoodie says, sport
In women's cycling.
is a human right. That is what you believe in. Talk me through.
Sport is a human right. Okay, but competing at the Olympics is not a human right. I sure as shit am never gonna get to go. I'm never gonna get to go sit in the seats in the stands and watch that shit, much less attend as an Olympian. Please. If that's a human right, well, I have been bereft. Okay? Please. As have most of us. It's almost as if participating in the Olympics is like exclusive or something.
Talk me through Just a little bit of why you believe fighting for transgender athletes to compete in the categories they'd like to in sport is so important.
So it's a fundamental tenet of like the Olympic movement that sport is a human right. So
What in the world? I suppose I'm not exactly well versed in the Olympic movement. Is he referring to, you know, the idea of like uniting the world behind, a group of champions? Because I guess that's laudable, right? Theoretically, it's a nice idea. We all tune into this big sporting event, and we all kind of have a dog in the race, and everybody is involved, and that's lovely, right? Uh, it doesn't say anything about competing wherever you want is a human right. It doesn't say anything about competing at all being a human right. So, yeah, like what that slogan is not doesn't seem to mean what you're trying to make it mean there, friend.
on their Olympic charter, in their fourth fundamental principle of Olympism, they say participation in sport is a human right, and they mean that at the competitive level.
Mm-hmm.
So
They do, even though that's not what they said. And they're the Olympic Committee, and you'd think that they would specify that, but whatever.
this issue, people like to say that it's a complicated issue, and I don't actually think it is. I think it's very simple. It all boils down to, do you actually think that trans women and intersex women are real women?
We're not talking about intersex, so I am going to ignore that because that is a different, separate conversation entirely. Sticking with the subject at hand, no, trans women are men, otherwise they wouldn't be trans anything. But he's going to get there in just a second. Let's keep going.
And are really female or not? And if you
Whoa, wait a minute. What happened to gender and sex being two different things? What happened to social roles? How in the hell did we get to talking about you being female? I thought that being female had nothing to do with being a woman, and that's why we can't, refer to anyone having anything to do with the female reproductive system as one.
you do, it's very simple. Just stop policing who counts as a real woman.
No.
Because this has had history of racism built into it over the years.
Okay. This is that same stupid straw man that they just love to whip to death and then, burn or whatever you do with straw men. Is that the early feminists were racists? That doesn't mean that the idea that women are equal human beings is based in racism. It doesn't. And also, I have bad news for you. Everyone was racist in the 19th century. Everyone. Most people are racist now. Okay, to some degree, in some way. Like it's just so hard. That's kind of the human mind works by heuristics. And it's just sort of how that, especially if you really just don't encounter a certain group of people in your everyday life, you really have no choice but to have your mental image of them be built upon images that you've seen and encountered of them. One might be cognizant of the fact that that's not reality, but that's really about as far as you can go with that. Aside from going there and meeting them, which not everybody gets to do, unfortunately. Okay. There's the human impulse, and then there's the self-awareness to temper that, which apparently you just don't really have. So I can understand why, for McKinnon, that might be a difficult idea to wrap his little mind around.
It's not an accident that the intersex athletes who get singled out are women of color from the global south, because who gets singled out for scrutiny is based on white women's conceptions of femininity.
What the actual fuck? For the first time, this is so rare that just being a white woman makes me an authority on anything. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it makes me an authority on being a white woman. Right? And we don't have like this monolithic conception of feminine, like white culture. Like, oh my God. It's okay. And this is going to be a little spicy here, but it's okay to, talk about everybody's culture, but white people, because as soon as you start talking about white culture, you have some weirdo covered in swastika tattoos sidle up next to you and go, "Hey, how you doing?" It's like, no, 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 no. But see, white culture is not actually a thing. Okay, these people in Romania and people in Ireland don't have the same culture really at all in most ways. Okay, are they related? Sure, they're both European Christians, and in a lot of ways, that's pretty much where that stops. And those two groups certainly would not look at one another and think that and just go, "Hey, yeah, we're basically the same." Shit, you can't even get the Irish and the Scots to do that. Okay, this there. I mean, that's pretty much it. This whole idea of white culture as some sort of a monolith is as much of a myth as any of the rest of that shit.
And that's being weaponized against trans people too. So it's a fear of protecting the fragile, weak, cis white woman.
Ew. And like, okay, in the United States especially, there is a history of this idea of like protecting white womanhood and femininity from like black men. Um, but like they sure as hell weren't worried about, oh, there's my neighbor's stereo. I apologize so hard. Yeah, just keep on driving. Yeah, sorry about that. They certainly weren't worried about protecting the white women from the black women because, well, who the hell do you think their servants were?
From the rest of us.
So there are many elements to what you said, which I appreciate. So let's try to break them down. One thing that confuses me personally is it seems like we have discussions about who should participate in which category and how. On the face of it, it seems simple, as you say. If somebody identifies as a woman, if they're transgender, they can compete against women who want.
Right, except that that's a sex category. They never differentiate, I don't think, anywhere in this entire interview between sex and gender. That whole sex and gender are two completely different, separate things. Apparently, we're just not even doing that here at all. Uh, we're just going to conflate them. We're just going to pretend that those two words mean the same thing again and that it's like 1997 up in this bitch.
Born biologically, and then if not, then not. But then there are many who would argue who are not transphobes. There are many who born biologically women who will say, but you have an unnatural advantage over me.
It's a natural advantage. Yes. And just implying that makes you automatically a transphobe, Noah, and I can completely understand the tinge of just terror that I hear in your voice there because, boy, are you walking on thin ice, huh?
And that makes the sport unfair. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, there's lots of ways you can respond to that. So the first is the very language of you were born and I'm not biological somehow. Like, I don't think I'm a cyborg. So, like, this idea that.
Oh my god, can we say false dichotomy? You're either biologically female or you're a cyborg? Nah, motherfucker. There's another option, at least one, that I can think of right off the top of my head.
Like, oh, you're not a biological woman. Well, I am a woman. That's a fact. I am female. So all my identity records, my racing license, my medical records.
Okay, that's just an appeal to authority. You can literally have it written down as many times as you want. That doesn't make it fucking true. What the hell is that? Anybody that falls for that really needs to have their critical thinking skills sharpened. Oh my god. And as for, oh, well, I'm a woman and that's just a fact. Says you. Based on what? I think we all know. Fucking nothing. And I'm biological, therefore I'm a biological woman. It's like, no. Yeah, you can make the language depict whatever you want. It doesn't actually change the reality that you're attempting to describe or obfuscate, depending.
I'll say female, right? And I'm pretty sure I'm made of biological stuff. So I'm a biological female as well.
No. You're made of biologically male stuff. Okay? That's why you have to be a trans woman. That's why you're here. talking to Trevor Noah. If you were just some lady who liked to ride her bike, you wouldn't be here having this conversation, would you?
So this question of, do trans women have an advantage over cis women? We don't know.
I suppose that would depend on the circumstances, but as far as cycling, yes, they do. And I'm just going to go ahead and let him say the wrong things and then correct him.
In fact, there's basically no published research on this question.
Because everyone took it as a given. Like, women weren't even allowed to ride bicycles at first. And then there was like a big kerfuffle about it because we liked having freedom so much. It was like seriously, look this up. When bicycles were first invented in the late 19th century, and women really took to them because all of a sudden we could get around and shit on our own, under our own power. And society kind of flipped its lid. It was like along the lines of video games is going to make the children all kill one another. Like, really, it was that bad. But like, we weren't even allowed to run in marathons until I think the 1960s because they thought our uteruses would fall out. Okay, there's always been men's sports. Women's sports are sort of a newfangled thing. There's definitely a difference. There's no fucking studies on it because everybody took this shit for granted until about 10 minutes ago.
However, there's good reason to think that there isn't, but I think it's irrelevant because we allow all kinds of competitive advantages within women's sport. So one example I'd love to talk about is the 2016 Rio Olympic women's high jump final. First place was over 6'3", 10th place was 5'5". So a 10.5-inch height difference between first and 10th at the Olympics.
Yeah, well, that's true because some people do have physical advantages over other people. The genetic lottery is, ruthless like that. That doesn't somehow magically mean a man can be a woman. Nope.
In high jump, right? And we call that fair. Okay. So the range of body types within the female category is way, way bigger than anything that could be attributed to trans women.
Aside from the fact that they're all women. They are all female, and I'm not going to spend any more time explaining what the fuck that means because we all know.
So if there's an advantage, and I'm not saying that there is, for trans women in women's sport, it's not an unfair advantage. But also, we've been competing.
So if we do have an advantage, it's just, the way it is, and everybody should be cool with it because it's like being taller. No, because you're a man. Okay. That makes it different. That's a difference. Yeah, that none of those women have. See, it's a really easily observable material and measurable difference too.
Yeah, trying to compete at the highest level for decades. We've been allowed to compete for decades, and no one has won an elite world championship. No one has won an Olympic gold medal.
Well, that might be because they suck, and that's why they decided to go be in the women's category because they figured they might win something. Or it could be because the validation is enough for them and they're kind of throwing the events so that it doesn't tip everybody the fuck off. Because that would be obviously, the big fucking smoking gun, wouldn't it?
This Tokyo Olympics was the first time trans women even qualified for the Olympics. So it's like...
Because they changed the rules.
The idea that trans women are suddenly going to take over women's sport is an irrational fear.
If they keep changing the rules... Considering that, again, what'd you say, 2018? That was 4 years ago. So 6 years ago, they weren't even there. Now all of a sudden they're there, and they're taking spots that belong to, actual women. I can see how that would already feel like a takeover because nobody fucking invited them.
Trans women, which is the dictionary definition of transphobia.
So it's interesting that you say that.
Women are suddenly going to take over women's sport is an irrational fear of trans women, which is the dictionary definition of transphobia.
So, I guess that I like that. We have a dictionary definition for transphobia now, but we don't have a dictionary definition for woman. Isn't that something? But anyways, I suppose it would be irrational to fear trans women because trans women do not exist. As a female person, it is not irrational to fear men, and it's certainly not irrational to fear men who insist on crossing boundaries. From a female perspective, that is one of the most rational things in the entire world. So, kiss my ass, dude.
So it's interesting that you say that,
Oh,
because
interesting. Oh.
it's interesting that you say that because I think if I were to push back, or even not even playing devil's advocate, there are a few things that could be argued. Number one, you could argue that although the trans woman who competed in the Olympics didn't dominate, she did beat a field of women who might have qualified for that position, right? Secondly, when you talk about the height differences, I agree with this completely. But there are many who would argue that we exist in a state where a lot of the surgeries are new, a lot of the technology, just the technology is new. Transgenderism is not new. We know it throughout time, we've seen it throughout history.
Okay. I mean, nice virtue signaling there, Noah. Trans have been with us throughout history. Where? I've literally actually gone back and looked for them because there was, it's been very trendy the last decade or so to go back and try and transition, women who wore men's clothes, for example. Uh, there was a really famous example of an Irish woman in the 19th century who became a doctor. And yes, of course she went to class in men's clothes. If they'd have known she was a girl, they would have kicked your ass out. Hello? Hello? Like, what? What? Duh. And, so by the time that anybody really figured that out, I guess she must have proven herself. Because, you don't have an entire medical career without it. Some people knowing who you really are. I mean, that's really, I assume. But, there was a woman who dressed like a man to join the army to go find her husband. And then, ended up having a pretty decent military career and actually ended up getting a pension. This was in England. I don't know if they tried to trans her yet. She's not famous enough, but I'm sure her time's coming. Even though the reason that any of these people were notable at the time was because they were women. And that's why any of them are famous. That's why George Sand is famous. Because she lived as a man, by which they meant wore pants and had her own money and her own home. That's what living as a man counted as before the modern era, okay? Really, things that we consider now to be basic, young adult life goals used to be man things. And it's not fair to go back and rewrite history like this. Anyways, trans people did not fucking exist all throughout history. That is one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard.
But there are many who would say, how do we ensure that we are creating some sort of standard? And the reason we talk to this, we talk about this is the reason they have to regulate performance enhancing drugs. For instance, what is fair? What can you drink? What can you not drink? What can you consume? What can you not consume? Some would say, if you are born that way, that's how sport has determined who goes where. And then some would say, no.
That's how nature has determined who goes where. We just observe it, right?
Regardless of who you are, you should be able to compete. My question then comes in from a really, honestly, a different place. I look at somebody like Oscar Pistorius from South Africa, right? He was the double.
Okay, we're running a little long, so we're going to skip Trevor's little diversion into, amputee land and just listen to McKinnon's response.
But they're women and they're female. So, like I said, this boils down to, are trans women really women? Are they really female? Because if you think yes, then we belong competing with other women. So it's an extreme indignity to say, I believe you're a woman, except for sport.
Extreme indignity. It's certainly extremely logically inconsistent. I love that he's making this a sticking point, though. I really, really love that because it's piquing so many people. Really? This is the hill you want to die on? Because I think you might lose this one.
right? So you can't single out one of the most important facets of our society. We are obsessed with sport. Athletes are some of the most highly praised, highly paid people on the planet. So you can't say that, like, I believe you and I support you, but not for this one really big thing that society really cares about.
Right, and I'm saying I get confused by why we distill it down into just two things.
Okay. I definitely believe that Trevor's confused. But, like, yeah, Mr. McKinnon there just laid out for us exactly why they're going to lose this one. Because sport is very important to a lot of people. And men have, their pelvises are narrower. See? They have a mechanical advantage when it comes to speed. That just that has nothing to do with hormone levels and in adulthood at all. Nothing. During puberty it does, but once that pelvis size shape is baked in, like you can't, it doesn't. And height doesn't. Women have broader pelvises and our legs are angled, at a different angle from our hip bone, meaning that we just mechanically cannot move as fast. It has nothing to do with hormones. It has nothing to do with height. Fuck you, dude.
I'll tell you why. As we learn about gender being a spectrum, as we learn that people can identify in a multitude of ways, we accept the fact that we don't have to put people into categories of man or woman. That's why they say protect trans women. It's like otherwise,
Like, no, I don't accept that. We don't accept that, right, ladies?
which women are you protecting? It's an argument that doesn't separate or diminish anybody, but gives more specificity to what people are saying. And so,
Yeah, because you can't have specificity without exclusivity. You can't. Thank you, Trevor.
when we talk about these things, I sometimes get confused by why we're trying to force the people into two again when we've been taught that there isn't a two. Whereas a sport like, let's say, boxing, for instance, in boxing, people fight across all weight categories. They don't just go men's boxing, women's boxing. They go, no, men, heavyweight, super heavyweight, and then they'll be like middleweight, bantamweight, flyweight.
I do not know enough about boxing to make any good use of this analogy, other than to say they're still all men, though.
Do you not think that we're limiting ourselves by saying men's sports, women's sports, when we now know that there's so many more genders?
So I'm really going to dissatisfy you right now.
Well, you don't know what I'm looking for, though, so you can't.
I do.
Uh huh. Because narcissists know everything, don't they?
I know you're looking for something other than what I'm going to say, and that is a very important question and a very difficult question, but it's a separate question.
Why is that?
The question we're talking about is, given how sport is currently structured, should we include trans women and intersex women in women's sports?
Okay. Because this guy's not really worried about all the transgenders, is he? He's not worried about all the NBs, is he? No. He's worried about himself getting validation by being counted in women's sports. It's all he wants to talk about.
And my answer to that is a clear yes. If you want to say, should we revisit how we structure all of sport? I would say, yeah, we should do that. But if your only reason for doing that is because you can't just accept trans women or women, that's a problem I got with you.
No. I'm pretty sure he just said that his reason for doing that is like the gender spectrum. Right? So like trans women can be women, but like you can be all kinds of stuff. So all he's doing is taking your argument and applying it to the other categories that you claim to be speaking for. And your refusal to do that, I think, speaks volumes.
I understand. I'm not saying it's not what you. No, I hear what you're saying. No, I completely hear what you're saying. So let me ask you this then. Again, eliminating fringes, because everything on the internet becomes fringe. Everything becomes a fight and an argument. If somebody comes to you in good faith, and I mean genuinely good faith, and they say to you, Veronica, I was born a woman, raised a woman. I've suffered or lived and experienced life as a woman. This is where I am. This is where my body has gotten me to. I've grown as a woman. My body has had the testosterone or estrogen that it had to get me to this point, and that's why I am here. And I feel like you may or may not have the advantage, but we don't know yet. So why can't we wait to know these things before you compete against me? How would you respond to that?
How in the world would anyone know how to respond to such a mealy mouthed question? My God.
Because that's not how human rights work. So the way human rights work is that the default is inclusion and the burden of proof is on the people seeking to exclude.
No. Human rights apply to everyone by definition. They are things like access to food and water, access to shelter, you know, basic. I admit I've never read like the Geneva Convention, but it's things that apply to everyone. Um, and the reason that women have had separate spaces under those rules is because we simply have needs that men do not. We have vulnerabilities that men do not. So we have had private spaces in which to deal with those. It's, you know, the same rules do apply to men. They just simply don't have the need of some of the facilities that we do. That's just material reality coming back again. Ah!
Not the people seeking to include. So I want to share something shocking with everybody.
Oh, yeah, and the other thing about human rights is you might have noticed all those things that I mentioned deal with material needs.
It wasn't until 5 years ago that we actually studied the relationship between natural testosterone and performance, and we found.
Oh my God, I do not give a fuck. Because he's going to sit here and say that natural testosterone levels have no effect on sports performance, which I do not fucking believe for one split of a second, not one fraction of a second, not even a tiny little bit. But I don't care because I've not done the research on this because it doesn't matter because you're a man. That's it. That's all that matters at the end of the day. You are a man, and that is why you don't get included in women's sports and women's spaces. Okay, wow. They went on about testosterone affecting your performance for like a hot minute. And as I said, it is irrelevant. So moving on.
Like, my body doesn't produce testosterone, and it hasn't for a decade. But I switched sports from a road cycling event to a track power event, and I switched training, and I put on 25 pounds of muscle, and I went from being able to squat 170 to 375. So I don't produce any testosterone, and I squat a lot.
Okay. And the reason that this is moving on from that particular topic is because that has absolutely nothing to do with, as I said, your current adult testosterone level. It has to do with what you went through during puberty when your body was, fucking forming, dumbass. You have denser bone mass, you have denser muscle mass to begin with. That's just how it works. And hormone levels affect how these tissues grow themselves and build themselves when you're growing. Okay, you were already there, and yes, different training will affect your body in different ways. That's the whole fucking point of that, and it affects men and women differently. And there are actually different training regimens for men and women, taking into account the fact that women are more prone to things like snapped tendons and stuff like that.
And that's just because I changed training. So it's not so simple as, okay, if you drop your testosterone, you will get weaker. Because if you change your training, your diet, your rest and recovery, your sport, your performance can change.
Your body will change.
Wow, yeah, there's a lot of variables there, and one of them is your sex.
It seems like we're always going to end up in a cul-de-sac because many people use it as a cudgel, I realize, to scare people. Oh, the transgenders are coming for you, your bathrooms, your sports,
we are.
everything.
Did you catch that? It's like he couldn't help himself. Let's hear it again. It's so good.
We're always going to end up in a cul-de-sac because many people use it as a cudgel, I realized, to scare people. Oh, the transgenders are coming for you, your bathrooms, your sports,
we are.
everything. Be careful what you say. But it feels like there are many discussions to be had. It feels like, as you said, the research, the science, everything hasn't caught up. But I appreciate you for coming on the show and discussing this with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, wow. Woo! Huh? Bet he was relieved that was over. I know I am. Hang on. So that is, I just think, as I said, a brilliant and emblematic example of a mainstream representation of the trans movement, right? There's a person who has been in the news and the headlines for years talking to someone on a well established cable news program. I don't know how many people actually watch that shit anymore, but like more people than watch me, that's for damn sure. And I have to say something sometimes. This video has been covered in other places and they do a good job. I had to add my 2 cents, because I just felt that there were one or two things that weren't covered as much as I would want. So here we are. And Trevor, I understand that you're just a puppet, honey. I understand that. That looks terrifying. And I could not let that stand. We cannot let this stand. We have to counter this stuff in the mainstream, especially. I do try to hit more mainstream examples. I really try to keep it not just I try to reach outside of YouTube, when I can. Um and this one was just too perfect. It was low hanging fruit, quite frankly. That, Rachel was throwing softballs. Ah, because he's a girl. Ah, oh my god. Gross. Anyways, thank you so much for sticking with me through this. Share it around. I think this one is a really good, easily approachable example, and it has a lot of really common talking points in it. And it was really fun to have an opportunity to counter them for you here. And I hope that it's been useful and maybe educational, and maybe not for, my viewers who are all long time soldiers in this fight. But, like I say, share it around to some people who are maybe on the fence. We got to start poking at them. We got to start tugging at them. We got to start pulling them over on side, because the laws are changing now. And they're going to start defunding schools over this. I know around here that's what's about to happen. So this is just only going to get more and more fun. So thank you so much for being with me, and thank you so much for all your support. Stay strong out there, and yeah, like, subscribe, share around. See you next time. This has been Rad Mom. Bye.